2007 would stack up to the same model in 2010. At its base, the smallest environment that you can build with SharePoint is one where all the applications and services are installed on a single system. So that includes the database role, that includes all the SharePoint roles. In 2007, same thing with 2010. Databases, all the SharePoint applications, everything's installed on one system. The downside to this model is that there's a lot of contention between the database role and the SharePoint roles. Web servers work in very different ways than database servers do. So they're constantly fighting each other for resources. They don't optimize the memory. It's not built to be put into that situation. So it's definitely not recommended to do that. What we've always recommended in the past is that a minimum to break off the database role from essentially also applies to 2010. You still want to be able to break off the database server from the rest of your SharePoint role in almost any situation. If you don't have two physical servers, you can use server virtualization to do that. So I'll have some diagrams here where we'll actually demonstrate how you do that with the server virtualization. Where it really starts to change the difference between 2007 and 2010 is when you get into what's essentially the smallest farm that can be made to be fully bulletproof or fully highly available. In 2007, that was the 5-server farm. You used to have a dedicated server for the index role because you couldn't have the query on the same machine as the index server if you wanted to have a second copy of the query. It wouldn't copy off that second copy of the query. So in order to make that happen, you had to break it off and put the query out here on the web role and here on the second web role. That way, if you lost any one of these servers, you'd continue to have search functionality through the query roles. So the index server itself is not what actually serves up the queries to the users, it's the query role. Now, from a SharePoint 2010 perspective, what they did is they re-architected search. And once again, remember this is the default search, not the fast search. Fast search is completely different. They re-architected the default search to be able to allow you to have redundant search functionality directly here. So if you see, we dropped from having to have 5 servers down to basically having 4 servers. Now at the SQL level, this is effectively unchanged. You would use either SQL clustering or you'd use a high availability mirroring. So you could actually set up mirroring of your databases. If you're using synchronous mirroring, for example, you can mirror all of your databases from one system to the next and then have it automatically be failed over by a witness server. So this is either the mirroring or the clustering aspect. That hasn't changed. What's changed is this particular level here. Now you also notice, by the way, as we start to expand out the roles, is that I have multiple index partitions here. You can, within search, you can actually establish, instead of having one large index partition like you did with 2007, you can actually break up your content into multiple chunks. So that allows you to actually search against those, improve your search architecture and search against multiple index partitions at the same time. This particular model here, the web role itself has been broken off onto its own system, and then what are these service application roles, like the ones I mentioned, the Excel services, search as a service application role, that's broken off onto its own set of servers here. So that actually allows you to separate those very resource-intensive service application roles from the web role. So you don't have a scenario where someone takes down the server because they're doing intensive Excel services use, or they're doing intensive Word viewer use. It won't actually take down the web role. The web role will continue to run for everybody else. So this is actually a model that I prefer in a lot of cases because it breaks off the web traffic onto its own set of servers from that service application traffic. It keeps search from overwhelming services and that type of thing. And as we start to look at the larger environments, you can see, environments with multiple query servers, multiple web servers. You can start to break off your databases into multiple components as well. Service applications get set up onto their own dedicated machines. And depending on which service applications you're using, you may have a machine that's dedicated just to the Word viewer services, or just to Excel services, or just to the manage and edit service. So it depends on how big your environment is and how you're customizing it. But the important part to remember is that you can start with a small SharePoint farm and scale it up into a large farm. You can start from 50 users and go to 50,000 users with the same logical architecture, the same web FQDN. So the namespace for it is exactly the same. So it's able to scale up and it's able to scale out. Okay, so from an architectural perspective, virtualization, as I mentioned, is becoming very, very popular, and it's becoming much more common to run into server virtualization for both SharePoint environments and other types of server environments. So within our clients, in the SharePoint 2010 environments that we've set up already, a good 80% of them are running at least some of the server components, and I'm talking the production server components, on virtualized servers. So using virtualization technology, such as Microsoft's Hyper-V, or there's third-party virtualization, there's VMware ESX, there's Citrix Zen Server, there's these various virtualization technologies that exist. It's becoming very common to want to consolidate multiple servers down to a small number of physical machines. I just finished doing a design that incorporated Exchange, incorporated SharePoint, incorporated Office Communication Server, and was incorporated in a small number of virtual hosts with some of the components that were physical in that case. They actually still have the SQL Server role physical, they have the mailbox server roles physical, but the rest of the roles, including the SharePoint front-end roles, including the Exchange client access server roles, those were all put on virtual machines running underneath a small number of physical guests. So some guidelines around this. If you are going to virtualize, bear in mind that you can get yourself into big trouble if you don't do this right. If you don't give the proper resources to your virtual hosts, your performance will suffer. So it's very critical that you do this, particularly with an application as hungry as SharePoint is. SharePoint wants as much memory and as much RAM as it can get. If you don't feed it, it's going to starve. It's going to literally be, the users are going to try to hit it. It's going to take 10 seconds to load a page up. You're going to be wondering what's happening. And that's because you'll have these bottlenecks, these performance bottlenecks within your virtual